silence of my apartment was the loudest sound I knew. For 6 months, ever since my design agency folded, my world had shrunk to these 4 walls, the glow of the laptop screen, and the hollow echo of my own footsteps. I was 31, living in Philadelphia, and I wasn't living. I was just waiting for an email, for an idea, for a spark that never came. My days were a blur of freelance gigs that paid the bills but starved the soul. To break the monotony, I developed a strange habit, scrolling through online auctions for defaulted storage lockers. I never bid. It was just a way to see the fragmented leftovers of other people's lives, a reminder that everyone had a story, even if it ended up in a 10 by 10 metal box. One rainy Tuesday, a listing caught my eye. Locker 14B, the payment was 3 years overdue. The contents were listed as antique tools and household goods. The pictures were blurry, showing a little more than dusty tarps and the leg of a wooden workbench. Something about it, maybe the sheer neglect, made me pause. The current bid was $50. On an impulse that I still can't explain, I typed in $55, hit bid, and closed the laptop. I won it for $55. The next day, I stood in front of the rolling metal door of locker 14B. The air was musty, thick with the smell of dust and forgotten time. It was mostly junk, broken furniture, boxes of mildewed books, a set of cracked porcelain dishes. I felt a pang of buyer's remorse. Then, under a heavy canvas tarp in the back corner, I saw it. It was a workbench, and on it sat a large, intricate wooden box. It was crafted from dark mahogany with no visible lock or hinge, its surface covered in impossibly detailed carvings of constellations and gears. It was beautiful, but it was sealed shut. Tucked beneath it was a thick leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. I took the box and the journal back to my apartment. The box remained a mystery, but the journal changed everything. The first entry was dated 40 years ago. The handwriting was elegant, precise, belonging to a man named Arthur Vance. Arthur wasn't writing a diary. He was writing a conversation with himself. He was a horologist, a clockmaker. He wrote about the philosophy of time. He didn't see it as a thief, but as a craftsman. Time doesn't take things away. One entry read, "It files them down, revealing the true shape of what matters." I spent all night reading. Arthur was a recluse, a genius who saw the world in mechanisms and movements. He wrote about his workshop, about the scent of cedar wood and brass oil. He wrote about his masterpiece, a project he called the Orrery of Memories. It wasn't just a model of the solar system. He described it as a machine that would hold a moment. "We try to hold moments in our minds," he wrote, "but our minds are soft. They warp. I will build a place where a moment can live forever, exactly as it was." I became obsessed. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting. I was searching. The journal was filled with sketches, complex gear ratios, and cryptic notes. He mentioned a specific supplier, Elias Thorne's Antiques, a place he trusted for rare parts. I found the shop online. It was still in business, tucked away on a cobblestone street in Old City. The shop was chaos. Clocks ticked out of sync, filling the air with a frantic metallic heartbeat. A tiny silver-haired man peered at me over a pair of circular glasses. He was Elias Thorne. I felt ridiculous. I'm sorry, this is going to sound strange, but I'm looking for information about a man named Arthur Vance. He was a customer of yours. Elias's face tightened. Arthur Vance is dead, he said, his voice sharp. He died at least a decade ago. Why are you digging up ghosts? I pulled the journal from my bag. I found this in his storage locker. Elias froze. He reached out with a trembling hand and traced the faded gold lettering on the cover. He didn't open it. He just stared at it, his eyes lost. I worked for him, Elias said, his voice barely a whisper. I was his apprentice 40 years ago. He was a master, a difficult, brilliant, impossible man. What happened? I asked. Elias turned away, busying himself with a nearby grandfather clock. He was building something. That Orrery. He poured everything into it, his money, his time, his sanity. I told him he was chasing a phantom. I told him it was just a machine, that it couldn't hold a soul. We argued. I called him a fool. He told me I had no vision. He sighed, a heavy, rattling sound. I was young. I wanted to build things that people used, clocks that told the time. He wanted to build something that stopped it. I left his workshop and never spoke to him again. I heard he became a hermit. I always assumed he'd destroyed the machine. He didn't, I said. He kept working. But the journal stops. It mentions a problem he couldn't solve, a missing weight. And then there's this. I pointed to the mahogany box. I found it with the journal. It won't open. Elias looked at the box, and a slow spark of recognition lit his eyes. He walked over, his movement suddenly certain. He didn't try to pry it open. Instead, he pressed his fingers against the carved constellations. He pressed on Lyra, then Cygnus, then Aquila, the summer triangle. A series of soft clicks echoed from within the box, and the lid slid open. Inside, resting on velvet, was a single, beautiful gear made of brass, and a small, handwritten note. Elias read the note aloud, his voice thick with emotion. My boy, you were the only one who would ever know the combination. You were right. It was just a machine, but it was our machine. I couldn't finish it without you. You were the missing weight. Elias wept. He mourned the 40 years of silence, the pride that had kept two friends apart. And I stood there, a stranger who had stumbled into the final chapter of their story. Where is the workshop? I asked. The journal had the address. It was an old industrial building by the river, long since condemned. Elias had the keys to his old master's properties. As the last known associate, he had been the executor of an estate that contained nothing but debt and a storage locker. He had paid for the locker for years, never knowing what was inside, until he simply couldn't afford it anymore. We went to the workshop that evening. The door creaked open into a cavernous room, draped in white sheets like a tomb. Elias pulled back the largest sheet. It was the Orrery of Memories. It was magnificent, a towering sculpture of brass and steel, gears and wires, all centered on a beautiful, hand-blown glass sun. But it was still, lifeless. He never finished it, Elias said, running a hand over the cold metal. Look, the main drive mechanism is empty. He took the brass gear from the mahogany box. It was the final piece. He slid it into place. It fit perfectly, but nothing happened. "It needs a start," I said, remembering the journal. He wrote that it wasn't powered by electricity. It was powered by a single, perfect rotation. He was a clockmaker. It's spring-wound. Elias pointed to a small, unassuming keyhole at the base. The key was still in the lock. He turned it. There was a deep, resonant click. A low whirring began. And then, slowly, the machine came to life. The planets began to turn. The glass sun began to glow with a soft, warm light from within. But that wasn't the marvel. As the planets moved, tiny, intricate scenes emerged from within the structure. A miniature version of Elias and Arthur laughing at the workbench. A tiny model of the antique shop. A final heartbreaking scene of Arthur, old and alone, placing the final gear into the mahogany box. It wasn't a model of the solar system. It was a clockwork museum of Arthur's life. A machine to hold his most important moments. We watched it for an hour. Two men bound by the ghost of a third. Elias Thorne never returned to his antique shop. He spent the next year restoring Arthur's workshop and the Orrery. He reopened it, not as a shop, but as a museum and a school, teaching the craft of horology to a new generation. He was no longer a man haunted by the past, but a man preserving it. And me? I never went back to my old life. The spark I was looking for wasn't on a laptop screen. It was in the dust of that locker, in the precise handwriting of a lonely genius, in the click of a perfectly placed gear. I sold my apartment and used the money to buy a small woodworking shop. I restore things. Old furniture, broken music boxes, forgotten frames. I take the things that time has filed down and try to find their true shape. Sometimes, late at night, I visit Elias. We'll sit in the workshop, the soft light of the orrery painting the walls, the air filled with the scent of cedar and brass oil. And we'll listen to the sound of the machine, a steady rhythmic beat like a heart that had stopped, and that we together had managed to start again.